In the quiet town of Willow Creek, Georgia, population just under 3,000, folks still left their doors unlocked and waved at passing cars on Sunday afternoons. It was the kind of place where secrets didn't last long and where reputation meant everything. And no one had a reputation more sterling than Sheriff Marcus Langford. At 58 years old, Marcus was the face of law and order in Willow Creek. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a clean-shaven jaw and salt and pepper hair that gave him an air of seasoned wisdom. He'd worn the badge longer than some of his deputies had been alive. For 3 decades, Marcus patrolled the streets, attended church potlucks, hosted neighborhood watch meetings, and shook every hand that reached for his. He didn't just enforce the law, he was the law. He and his wife, Judith, had been married for 32 years. They had 2 grown children, Emily, a schoolteacher in Atlanta, and Jacob, a mechanic who had taken over the family garage. To anyone watching from the outside, the Langfords were the picture of stability, success, and Southern grace. Every 4th of July, Marcus was the one leading the parade in his polished patrol SUV, waving to children as they ran behind fire trucks, tossing candy. On Thanksgiving, he and Judith passed out frozen turkeys to struggling families. At Christmas, he dressed up as Santa Claus for the elementary school. He was more than a sheriff. He was Willow Creek's father figure. But behind the polished boots, behind the kind smile and Sunday sermons, there lived a man who knew exactly how to control a story. A man who understood that in small towns, image was everything, and secrets, when buried deep enough, had a way of staying that way. Marcus wasn't a cruel man, at least not outwardly, but he was meticulous, methodical, the kind of man who remembered every name, every face, and every favor owed. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't have to. His authority came from presence, not volume. And people respected that, or feared it, often both. There were whispers, of course. Every small town has them. That Marcus had been a bit too close with that waitress at Delilah's Diner back in '08. That he always hired young female deputies, always pretty, always single. But there was never any proof. Just murmurs, drowned out by church bells and the sound of lawnmowers in the spring. Judith knew her husband well. She knew the difference between the man who kissed her forehead each morning and the one who came home late with the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar. But she played her part. That was the deal. In return, she had security, a beautiful home on Hickory Lane, and the admiration of every woman in town. She didn't ask questions, and Marcus didn't offer answers. If there was one thing Marcus feared, more than death, more than losing his badge, it was disgrace. Public disgrace. The kind that spread like wildfire through a community like Willow Creek. The kind that turned friends into whispers and church pews into judgment seats. He built his life on the illusion of control. He couldn't let that crumble. Not now. Not after everything he had built. And so when the storm came, and it would come, it wouldn't be sudden. It would be quiet at first. A rustle in the cornfield. A whisper in the wind. But beneath that calm exterior, darkness was already rising. And the man everyone trusted would become the man everyone feared. But for now, Marcus stood in front of the mirror in his wood-paneled office, adjusting his collar, placing his sheriff's pin just right. He looked tired but dignified. He'd just come back from giving a speech at the local high school about responsibility and honor. The irony of it didn't escape him. He looked out the window. Children were walking home from school, laughing. The bakery was closing its doors for the day. Everything looked as it should, as it had to look. Because what no one in Willow Creek knew, not his deputies, not his wife, not even the God he prayed to on Sundays, was that Sheriff Marcus Langford had made a terrible mistake. And it was only a matter of time before that mistake started crying for help. Tiana Mitchell was just 19, but life had already taught her not to expect much. She worked the evening shift at Roy's Gas and Go, a rundown station on the edge of Willow Creek where the soda machine sputtered, the lights buzzed overhead, and the security cameras were more for show than function. It wasn't glamorous, but it helped her and her grandmother keep the lights on. And on a good night, she could sneak home a half-eaten sandwich from the day-old rack without anyone noticing. Tiana had dreams once. Small ones. She wanted to go to beauty school, Open a little salon with purple walls and Motown music playing in the background. But dreams don't pay the bills. And after her mama died from a stroke when Tiana was 16, there just wasn't space for anything soft anymore. Then came Sheriff Langford. He'd been stopping by the gas station for years, mostly to chat with Roy or refill his coffee. But a few months back, something changed. His glances lingered. His compliments grew warmer. Not crude. Marcus Langford was too polished for that. But his words curled around her like smoke. "You got a smile that could melt concrete," he once said, handing her a folded 20 and telling her to treat yourself to something sweet. At first, Tiana laughed it off. She knew when a man was flirting. She also knew when he had no intention of leaving his wife. But there was something different about Marcus. He was powerful, respected, and for the first time in a long time, someone saw her, really saw her. Not just as the tired girl behind the counter, but as something more. He started visiting more often, sometimes twice in a night. He brought her coffee, flowers, even once a necklace that he claimed his wife didn't care for. He asked about her dreams, her past, her grandmother's health. And Tiana, who had spent years building walls, started to let herself believe she mattered. The first time he kissed her, it was in the back of his patrol car. She had just finished her shift. He offered her a ride home. But instead of taking her to her grandmother's house, he drove to a secluded spot near the old mill. The stars were out, the air thick with cicadas and humidity. He leaned in, slow and careful, like he was afraid she might break. "I shouldn't be doing this," he whispered. But he did it anyway. What followed wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was secretive, calculated. Marcus rented a room under a fake name at a rundown motel 20 minutes outside of town. He only called her from disposable phones. He never texted. He made her swear on her mama's grave, never to tell a soul. And for a while, she didn't. Because when Marcus held her, whispered promises in her ear, she didn't feel like a poor gas station clerk. She felt wanted, chosen, special. But as weeks turned into months, the rules grew tighter. He didn't want her going out, didn't want her posting pictures online. He warned her about jealous folks in town. And when she once asked what would happen if someone found out, Marcus's voice dropped low and cold. "Then I'd lose everything, Tiana. And so would you." That was the first time she saw fear in his eyes. Still, she kept his secret, even when her friends questioned where she was disappearing to on Saturday nights. Even when her grandmother grew suspicious of the cash that started showing up at her purse. But secrets have a way of growing heavy. And everything changed the moment that pregnancy test turned positive. She took it in the gas station restroom. 3 minutes that stretched into eternity. The second pink line appeared, clear as day. Tiana stared at it, hand trembling, breath caught in her throat. She was going to have a baby. His baby. She didn't tell him right away. For days, she wrestled with the truth. Would he be happy? Would he finally leave his wife? Or would he disappear like so many men before him? When she finally told Marcus, shaking hands, eyes glossy with hope, he didn't say a word, just stared at her, stone-faced. Then quietly he said, "That's not an option, Tiana. You need to take care of this." Discreetly. Her stomach dropped. She expected shock, maybe anger, but not this cold, calculated tone, as if she were a problem to be cleaned up. A mess on his perfect record. "I'm keeping it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her like she had betrayed him. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "This could ruin both our lives." But Tiana wasn't 16 anymore, and for the first time, she held the power. She didn't want his money. She didn't need a husband, but she wanted to give her child the chance to be loved, truly loved, even if that meant raising it alone. Marcus left that night without another word. But 2 days later, a thick envelope showed up on her doorstep. Inside, $3,000 in crisp bills, and a note that simply read, "Please do the right thing. M." She tore it up, not because she wasn't tempted, but because deep down, she wanted more than his silence. She wanted acknowledgement. A few weeks later, she sent him the first ultrasound picture. The baby's tiny hand curled like a fist. He never responded, but she kept the photo and started planning for a life he wanted erased. Tiana named the baby Elijah. He was born on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in a hospital 40 miles outside of Willow Creek, where no one knew her name and no one would raise questions about the father's absence on the birth certificate. The labor was rough, long, and quiet, just her and a worn-out nurse who offered a smile that felt more mechanical than kind. But when they placed the tiny boy in her arms, with his dark hair and wrinkled skin, all the shame, fear, and exhaustion melted away. He was perfect. He was hers. And he looked just like Marcus. Same jawline. Same deep-set eyes. She couldn't stop staring. For the next few weeks, Tiana tried to settle into life as a new mother. Sleep-deprived and overwhelmed, she moved back in her grandmother's home, sharing a bedroom barely big enough for a crib. The nights were endless. Elijah cried often, his lungs tiny but fierce. Yet Tiana never complained. Not once. Because for the first time in her life, she felt needed. But what she hadn't expected was the loneliness. Her friends drifted. Her grandmother, though supportive, was too old to help much. She couldn't go back to work right away, and the bills stacked faster than she could breathe. What little savings she had disappeared in diapers, formula, and late-night cab rides to the pharmacy. And Marcus? He was silent. Not a call, not a message, not even a knock on her door. Until one morning, after a particularly sleepless night, she sent him a message. Just a photo of Elijah, wrapped in a blue blanket, eyes barely open, and one line underneath. "He has your eyes." Marcus didn't respond. Tiana waited 2 days. Then she sent another message. "If you won't be a father, I'll find someone who will. Or maybe I'll go to the press." That got his attention. 3 hours later, she received a voicemail. Marcus's voice was low, tight, and colder than she'd ever heard it. "Don't do anything stupid, Tiana. Think about your future." Think about his future. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But the message lingered in her chest like smoke. For a moment, she considered deleting it, but something told her to keep it. She began documenting everything. Screenshots, notes, receipts, every interaction with Marcus, every dollar he'd ever handed her, every comment that felt off. A part of her was still holding out hope that he'd do the right thing, admit what he'd done, help raise the child he created. But another part of her was preparing for war. And so, she wrote the letter. A full page, handwritten in looping script, detailing everything. How they met, the motel visits, the gifts, the pregnancy, the silence. She kept it folded beneath the lining of Elijah's diaper bag. "If anything happens to me," she told her friend Keisha one afternoon, "this letter goes straight to the police." Keisha didn't know the full story. No one did. But even in fragments, it was enough to give her pause. "Girl, you need to be careful," she warned. "Men like him, they don't lose well." Still, Tiana pushed forward. She started looking into child support filings. Consulted with a legal aid attorney in Macon. She even drove to the sheriff's station once. Elijah strapped to her chest in a sling, standing outside for nearly 10 minutes before losing her nerve and walking away. But she was done being quiet. One evening, she called Marcus from a burner phone. When he picked up, she didn't wait. "I'm giving you one last chance. Either you come clean, or I go public." There was silence on the other end. For a moment, she thought he'd hung up. Then, "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," she replied. "You made the mistake the night you touched me." He exhaled, a long, slow breath. "Let's talk," he said finally. "Face to face. Just you and me. No lawyers. No drama. I'll come to you." Tiana's chest tightened. She didn't trust him. Not really, but part of her wanted to. She wanted to believe the man who once held her so gently still had a sliver of decency left. "Tomorrow night," he said. "I'll pick you up. Just talk." She hesitated, then agreed. Against her better judgment. That night, she sat by Elijah's crib and ran her fingers through his soft hair. She whispered promises, that no matter what happened, she'd protect him, that he mattered, that he deserved to exist. She never told her grandmother about the meeting. She only packed Elijah's bag with a change of clothes, a bottle, and a pacifier shaped like a tiny bear. Then, as if guided by instinct, she slipped the letter she wrote beneath the bottle, just in case. And when Marcus pulled up outside the house in an unmarked sedan, engine humming, lights off, she took a deep breath, kissed Elijah's forehead, and stepped outside. She never came back. The car ride was quiet. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Tiana sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around Elijah, who had already dozed off, lulled by the hum of the engine. Neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick, not with rage, but something worse. Finality. They drove past the city limits, past the diner with the broken neon sign, past the church steeple barely lit by the moonlight, and into the woods just beyond the county line. Marcus said it was someplace quiet, where they could talk without interruption. Tiana, despite every warning bell screaming in her head, went along with it, because somewhere deep down she still thought she mattered to him. They pulled off the road into a gravel clearing, the old hunting grounds, long abandoned, shrouded by pine trees that whispered with the wind. Marcus shut off the car, exhaled deeply, and turned to her. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said. Tiana looked at him. "Then don't make it. You think I can just walk into that town hall, announce to everyone that I fathered a child with a teenager, and still keep my life?" he asked, voice tightening. "I never asked you to keep your life, Marcus. I asked you to keep your word," she said, barely above a whisper. "You promised you wouldn't leave me alone in this." Marcus stared at her, jaw clenched, breathing shallow. For a moment, he looked like he might break. Then something inside him shifted, hardened. "You don't understand," he said coldly. "This isn't just about you. This is about everything I've built. My family, my career, my name. Do you think people in that town forgive this?" Tiana adjusted Elijah in her arms. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering. "Then maybe you shouldn't have touched me in the first place," she said. "But you did, and now he's here. He didn't ask for any of this." Marcus looked at the child, and for the first time, the first real time, he let his eyes linger. He saw the curve of the nose, the shadow of his own face in miniature. Something flickered in his expression. Regret, or maybe recognition, and then, just as quickly, denial. "This can't happen," he muttered. "It just can't." Tiana reached into the diaper bag and pulled out the folded letter, the one she kept beneath the bottle. She handed it to him. "You have two options, Marcus," she said firmly. "You help us quietly, or I make noise." He took the letter, read the first few lines. His face drained. "You wrote everything down?" he whispered. "Every word. Every lie," she said. "If anything happens to me, this goes public." Marcus folded the letter with precise care. Then he smiled, not kindly, but like a man who had already decided something. "I need to take a walk," he said. "Think." "Marcus," she started. "Stay in the car. Just stay." He stepped outside, walked to the edge of the clearing, disappeared into the trees. For 5 minutes, maybe 10, all Tiana heard was the wind. She reached for her phone. No signal. The woods felt too quiet. She held Elijah tighter, heart pounding in her chest. Something wasn't right. She thought about getting out, about walking back toward the road. But then she saw Marcus returning, and he wasn't alone. In his hand was a tire iron. Tiana's mouth went dry. "What are you doing?" she asked, standing quickly, holding Elijah against her chest. He said nothing. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Still silent. Still walking. Her voice rose, panic flooding in. "Don't you come near me. I swear to God." But he didn't stop. What happened next unfolded in a blur. A scream swallowed by the trees, the sound of metal against flesh, a baby's cry piercing the night, and then silence. The woods of Willow Creek had always been quiet, but that night they swallowed a secret so dark, even the moon seemed to hide behind the clouds. Back in town, Marcus returned home just after midnight. Judith stirred when he entered the bedroom. "You're late," she murmured. "Had a situation out past Monroe Road," he said, slipping off his boots. "Handled it." She rolled over, never opening her eyes. Marcus showered longer than usual, scrubbed until his skin burned until his thoughts faded. He didn't sleep that night, just stared at the ceiling, Elijah's cry still echoing in his ears. By morning, Tiana's grandmother had already called the sheriff's department. Said her granddaughter and great-grandson never came home. Marcus took the call himself. "I'll look into it, ma'am," he said smoothly. "I promise we'll find them." The morning air in Willow Creek was brisk and unusually quiet. Tiana's grandmother, Ms. Lucille, sat in her worn recliner, hands trembling as she held Elijah's tiny onesie. The baby hadn't come home. Neither had Tiana. And that girl never stayed out without calling, not with a newborn in tow. By 9 a.m., Lucille called the sheriff's department. She didn't ask for anyone specific. She didn't have to. The voice that answered was steady, familiar. Sheriff Langford speaking. Lucille's voice cracked as she explained. She was supposed to be home last night. Said she was going to meet someone. She took the baby. That was almost 12 hours ago. Marcus rubbed his temple, as if inconvenienced. Maybe she stayed with a friend? Checked into a hotel for some rest. She left the crib, her pump, the baby's formula, everything. Lucille snapped. My granddaughter is gone, and so is my great-grandson. Don't you tell me to calm down. Marcus paused for effect. I'll open a missing persons file, he said at last. We'll take it seriously. And just like that, the man who killed them both was now the one leading the search to find them. The first 48 hours were smoke and mirrors. Marcus assigned 2 rookie deputies to the case. Boys who idolized him, boys who wouldn't ask questions. He told them to start canvassing local hospitals and shelters, knowing damn well they wouldn't find anything. He also made sure to swing by Lucille's house himself. Hugged her, reassured her, told her, "We're going to bring them home, ma'am. I promise." He even placed flyers with Tiana's photo around town, his own badge number on the corner. All the while, he kept one eye on the lake. That muddy body of water had swallowed secrets before, and with a little weight in the trunk, her old sedan sank without a sound. He'd wiped it down, of course. Wore gloves, removed the burner phone from her bag, smashed it, tossed it into a ravine on the state line. And the letter? Burned it behind his garage before dawn. The ashes washed away with the morning hose water, just like the guilt he refused to name. But secrets rot, and the longer they stay buried, the more they stink. 3 days after the disappearance, Detective Alicia Green, the department's only female investigator and one of the few who didn't treat Marcus like a living monument, requested access to the missing persons report. What she saw unsettled her. The file was thin, too thin. No last phone calls traced. No known associates questioned. No license plate entry sent to the state registry. And when she asked Marcus about it, he smiled that politician smile and said, "We don't need to chase ghosts." But Tiana wasn't a ghost. She was a teenage mother with no history of drug use, no known enemies, no prior incidents. And she loved that baby like air. Alicia knew girls like her. She had been a girl like her once. She reopened the report quietly, without permission. She also visited Lucille. The old woman was exhausted but sharp. She handed over a small envelope, a backup copy of the ultrasound Tiana had once left behind, and a photo of Elijah. Alicia studied both. The resemblance was uncanny. And then she asked the question no one had dared say aloud. Did Tiana ever mention who the father was? Lucille didn't answer immediately, but her eyes darkened. She was scared, she whispered. Said it was someone powerful, someone who wouldn't let her speak. Alicia's heart thudded in her chest. Was it someone in law enforcement? Lucille blinked. That silence was confirmation enough. A week later, the car was found. A fisherman down at Crooked Pine Lake called it in. Said something metallic shimmered under the water. The dive team pulled it out, rusted, waterlogged trunk shut tight. Inside were 2 decomposed bodies. One adult, one infant. The license plate was unreadable, but the VIN matched Tiana's vehicle. And the blanket wrapped around the baby was the same blue one seen in the photo Lucille had given to Alicia. There was no press conference, no public mourning. Marcus declared it a tragic accident. Said Tiana likely fell asleep at the wheel. Dismissed the idea of foul play. The coroner listed the cause of death as undetermined due to decomposition. But Alicia wasn't buying it. She called in favors. She sent the baby's DNA to a lab in Atlanta. The results came back 3 days later. Elijah Mitchell, male, approximate age 10 weeks, biological father, Marcus Langford. The blood drained from her face. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at the paper, hands shaking. The sheriff had murdered his own son, and the girl he claimed he'd never met. But bringing him down wouldn't be easy. Marcus had friends in high places, judges, DAs, church elders. Accusing him without airtight evidence would destroy her faster than him. She needed more. And she'd get it. Because if there was one thing Marcus Langford didn't understand, it was this. He'd underestimated a woman who knew how to hunt men like him. Detective Alicia Green wasn't afraid of ghosts. She was afraid of men who buried them. She kept the DNA report in a locked drawer at home, away from the prying eyes of the sheriff's department. She couldn't risk it getting lost in evidence like so many inconvenient files had under Marcus Langford's command. The results were undeniable. Elijah Mitchell was Marcus Langford's biological son. It was enough to ruin him if it ever saw the light of day. But Alicia knew better. Marcus hadn't stayed in power for 30 years by leaving trails. He covered things up like a surgeon, precise, bloodless, clean. No witnesses, no fingerprints, just smiling photographs in newspapers and speeches about duty and honor. She needed more than DNA. She needed motive, timeline, physical evidence, something the press, the court, and the public couldn't ignore, no matter how polished his boots were on Sundays. She started with the motel. The Blue Pine Motor Inn was the kind of place people went to forget their names. Cheap rates, no cameras, but the clerk remembered Marcus. Not as Sheriff Langford, of course, but as Mr. Wallace, the name he used every second Tuesday of the month when he rented room 8 for a few hours at a time. The clerk was nervous. Alicia showed him Tiana's photo. He froze. "I seen her," he said finally. "With him, holding hands couple times." He gave her an old logbook, handwritten. Mr. Wallace had paid cash, but the timestamps aligned with the months before Elijah's birth. The logbook went into her evidence folder. Next, the gas station. Roy's Gas and Go still had a busted camera, the one Tiana used to work under. But the owner, Roy himself, had a memory like a steel trap. "Yeah, Sheriff used to stop in," Roy said. "Every night for a while. More than usual. Started bringing her coffee. Smiling more. I figured something was up, but I don't get in people's business." Alicia pressed. "Did you ever see them leave together?" Roy looked uncomfortable. "Once or twice. She'd clock out. He'd be waiting out back in his unmarked car. Didn't think it was my place to say anything." She thanked him, jotted it down. Another piece of the puzzle. But the real break came from inside Marcus's house. Judith Langford was a quiet woman. Stoic, graceful in public. But privately, she'd spent decades pretending not to see the lipstick stains, the unexplained late nights, the perfume that wasn't hers. Alicia visited her under the pretense of a routine interview. Asked about the night Tiana and Elijah disappeared. Judith offered the standard answers. He said there was an incident. He came home late, didn't say much. But her eyes darted. Her fingers fidgeted. So Alicia tried something risky. She slid the ultrasound photo across the table. Judith's hand froze midair. "I found this in the baby's file," Alicia said softly. "It's your husband's son." Judith stared at it for a long time. Something in her cracked. Not loudly, but enough. "I always knew he was hiding something," she whispered. "But I never thought." She stood, walked into the den, and returned with a small black phone, an old burner. "I found this in his truck weeks ago. He said it belonged to one of the deputies. But I didn't believe him." Alicia opened it. There were no messages, no contacts, but in the gallery, a single photo. Tiana holding Elijah in her arms, both smiling, sitting on a motel bed. Dated 8 days before they vanished. It was the missing link. Alicia had motive. She had connection. She had digital evidence. Now, she just needed the final nail. She dug into Marcus's patrol car logs. Most departments didn't track unmarked vehicle use closely, but Marcus had gotten sloppy. On the night of Tiana's disappearance, the GPS showed his car traveling north toward Crooked Pine Lake, then stopping for nearly 90 minutes, then returning after midnight. That data, paired with the car being found submerged in the lake just miles from that point, was damning. Alicia requested a quiet forensic sweep of the vehicle Marcus had driven. On the underside of the chassis, they found tiny fragments of rust, consistent with immersion in that very body of water. The crime scene had been made to look like an accident, but the cover-up was unraveling. She took the file to the district attorney. His face went pale as he flipped through the documents. "Jesus Christ," he murmured. "This doesn't leave your office," Alicia said. Not until you sign the arrest warrant. You release this to Marcus or anyone loyal to him, and the whole thing disappears. He hesitated. He's a hero to this town. He's a murderer, Alicia said flatly. He killed a teenage girl and his own son to protect his image. That's not a hero. That's a coward with a badge. The DA nodded. I'll file the paperwork in the morning. But Marcus Langford wasn't a fool. That night, he got a call from someone inside the building. Just 4 words. She knows. It's over. He poured himself a drink, sat in his dark study, looked at the wall of plaques, awards, and framed photos, shaking hands with governors, hugging kids at toy drives, kissing his wife on election night. All of it meaningless now. The truth had caught up to him, and by morning, the handcuffs would follow. The day of Marcus Langford's arrest was supposed to be a celebration. It was his retirement ceremony, a grand affair planned for months, set in the Willow Creek Civic Hall, with banners reading, "Thank you, Sheriff Langford, 30 years of service." The mayor had prepared speech. The local news team had cameras ready. Church ladies baked casseroles and peach cobblers for the reception. And the sheriff? He stood tall in his full dress uniform, polished boots, silver badge gleaming on his chest like the town's final defense against chaos. But just as he stepped on stage to accept his plaque, the double doors in the back of the hall burst open. Detective Alicia Green entered with 2 state troopers at her side, warrant in hand. The room fell silent. A wave of whispers spread like wildfire. "Marcus Langford," Alicia said, her voice clear and calm. "You are under arrest for the murders of Tiana Mitchell and Elijah Mitchell." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Marcus smiled, that politician smile, and said gently, "There must be some mistake." But Alicia was already reading him his rights. The troopers stepped forward. Handcuffs clicked around the same wrist that had once held the keys to the county jail. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Judith Langford fainted into the arms of a neighbor. Emily, their daughter, stood frozen near the punch table, eyes wide, mouth open, as if the ground beneath her had split in 2. The cameras were still rolling, and the sheriff who had ruled Willow Creek with quiet command for 3 decades was escorted out the back door like a common criminal. The trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was packed every day. Locals who had once shaken Marcus's hand now came to see if he'd break. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Protesters held signs reading "Justice for Tiana" and "No one is above the law." Marcus pled not guilty. His defense team argued that the relationship was never proven, that the DNA was inconclusive, that Tiana had a history of instability, a cruel lie meant to cast doubt on a young mother who was no longer alive to defend herself. But the prosecution, led by ADA Melissa Ford, a black woman who'd grown up 2 towns over and had no love for small-town cover-ups, was ruthless. She laid it all bare. The logbook from the motel, the burner phone, the GPS trail, the photos of Marcus with Tiana, the ultrasound, the DNA match, and the voicemail, the one Tiana had saved on her grandmother's landline, recovered from an old answering machine and played for the jury. "Don't do anything stupid, Tiana. Think about your future." Think about his future. The courtroom was dead silent as the tape ended. But the most powerful testimony came from Emily Langford. She took the stand in a dark blue blazer, hands trembling slightly. "I looked up to my father my entire life," she said. "He taught me right from wrong. He taught me that justice was sacred. I used to tell my students that my dad was a hero." Her voice cracked. "And now I have to live with the truth that the man I admired most killed a teenage girl and a baby, his own grandson." Marcus never looked at her. Not once. The jury deliberated for just over 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree, abuse of power, obstruction of justice. The judge delivered the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't cry, just sat still, jaw clenched, as the gavel came down like a funeral bell. But Judith wept quietly in the back row, clutching a wrinkled photo of their wedding day. And Emily walked out of the courtroom alone. A month later, the sheriff's name was removed from every plaque in town. The welcome sign, once reading "Home of Sheriff Marcus Langford," was taken down by city workers under cover of darkness. The church removed his photo from the hallway, and the Langford home on Hickory Lane was sold to a family from Atlanta. No one in town wanted it. Judith moved in with her sister in Tennessee. She rarely spoke of her husband again. Detective Alicia Green received a quiet commendation from the governor, but she didn't attend the ceremony. She was back at her desk by morning, working a cold case involving another missing girl. Another town, another man with a badge. Because Marcus Langford wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. At the edge of Willow Creek Cemetery, beneath a small tree, lie two new headstones. Tiana Mitchell, beloved daughter, devoted mother, taken too soon. Elijah Mitchell, born in silence, died in darkness. Always loved. Sometimes when the wind is soft, the only sound you hear is the rustle of leaves and the quiet rage of a town that finally opened its eyes.